We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and he turned just in time to see her enter the room with her long, slender legs that climbed high up her skirt, leading the two tumultuous, round, melon breasts. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Scream Month, and this week we are talking the 1998 film Halloween H20, 20 years later. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my biological brother in an alternate timeline, Andrew Williams. All right. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am, it's kind of the culmination of this month, the culmination of this concept where they attempted to apply that Scream formula to an existing franchise. And we're going to see how it went.
New is old, what's old is new again. We don't have a video version of our podcast, but I kind of wish I did, just for the way that you stared at me as I read that opening line. Really? You're going to read the whole line, the whole thing?
This is what we're doing, huh? This is what we're doing? This was hot in the streets.
Well, Andrew, we're talking about a Halloween movie. This franchise, you are a huge fan. The movies in the franchise are kind of all over the place in terms of quality and their approach to the material, but you seem to kind of be along for the ride in some form or another for every single one of them. So I know you've got to be excited to talk about this movie today, but what would you say is your history with this one specifically, H20? Like, were you a fan of the franchise already whenever it came out? Is it one that you've got into later on? What's going on there?
It's definitely later on. I was 11 when this movie came out, so I don't really think Halloween was really on my radar at the time. Not in any serious kind of way. I do remember it coming out, though. Like, I remember seeing the trailers for, like, Halloween H20, and it kind of being hyped up as a semi-big deal that Jamie Lee Curtis was back on the Halloween franchise. And as I got into the franchise later, this one was always kind of pointed at as, you know, is it Halloween? No, but, like, people kind of hold it in the upper echelon of the franchise just because Jamie Lee's back. You had at least what felt like a competent attempt at a sequel where we were trying to kind of put all the pieces together versus the kind of classic just put out another movie for the sake of putting out another movie. And so I have seen it many, many times. We watch it almost every year here just because we enjoy these Scream adjacent type movies where they were like, let's put the hot young cast in a slasher flick. And so I was going to be watching this month anyway, one way or another. So hyping it up, tying it in with the podcast was a good move. But so yeah, I've seen it a bunch. We can talk about it a little bit more, but like, I think the reception on it has shifted over time a little bit within how people view it within the franchise. And but I'm still excited to talk about it. It's a movie I've watched a lot. Like I said, especially as I got into the franchise later. But it is, definitely not something I saw when it came out. That's for sure. At the ripe old age of 11, my parents weren't taking me to see Halloween H20 20 years later.
Well, I did not see this movie in theaters, but I did see it on home video, likely VHS, and I'm fairly certain this is the first Halloween movie I ever watched. I mean, I saw Scream at home when I was too young to see it, likely at a friend's house. I've seen all the movies that we talked about this month basically as they came out, and this was one of them. I remember, I forgot most of this movie by the time I rewatched it this week, getting ready for this podcast. This is the first time I've rewatched it since then, but there's little things here and there that always stuck with me. Most notably, the final scene of this movie, I have never forgotten. It was pretty wild to see as a child, but I didn't really know the significance of Jamie Lee Curtis being back or the story. Because we all know now that Halloween, the original 1978, is about this masked man that goes on a killing spree. Laurie Strode is the final girl there. Then Halloween 2 picks up right after the events of the first one, and it's revealed that Laurie is actually Michael Myers' sister. Then Halloween 3 has nothing to do with Michael Myers. It's not even in the same universe. It's a completely different story. And then Halloween 4, 5, and 6 jumps back to Michael Myers, but instead of focusing on Laurie Strode, she's not in it. It dives into the mythology of Michael Myers before we get to Halloween H20, which ignores the previous 3, or you could say 4 entries, and is a direct sequel to part 2. Well, we all know that, right? But at the time,
We all know that.
I wasn't aware. It's even wilder now that we have Halloween. Well, it's just called Halloween, but you have to say Halloween 2018 to differentiate it from Halloween 1978, because it is actually a direct sequel to that film, ignoring the events of 2 through 7. So it also involves an older Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode confronting Michael Myers, but in that version, they are not siblings, unlike in this version where they are, because it acknowledges the events of 2. Halloween is a wild franchise. But something that is interesting about this movie is just last week, our question of the week was all about legacy sequels and kind of the origins of them, specifically the recent kind of rash of legacy sequels that we had as kind of the in vogue thing the past 10 years or so. And during that discussion, we actually didn't mention Halloween H20, but it checks all the boxes. Like, this is a legacy sequel through and through that predates just about all of the examples that we gave. Now, it doesn't lead to more legacy sequels because I don't think it was necessarily trying to be a legacy sequel. I think all they had on their mind was, hey, Scream is big, slashers are back, we're sitting on this property, Michael Myers is iconic. How do we merge these two? How do we start fresh? Well, you just wipe the slate. You don't do a remake because that's not what's in vogue at the time. But you just ignore the convoluted sequels, kind of go back to basics, and sort of they back their way into making a legacy sequel. And I think it's so apparent whenever you compare sort of the marketing and kind of aura around this movie to Halloween 2018, which 2018 is really playing up the fact that it's a legacy sequel, and it has like this serious tone around it, and kind of this like, guys, this is a big deal that we're doing this. Whereas when this came out in 1998, it kind of felt like, oh, they're making another Halloween movie. Oh, cool. Jamie Lee Curtis is back. And that was kind of like the end of the conversation.
Yeah, if there's one box, I guess you could say that this movie doesn't check, it's the gap. Almost all the legacy sequels you can think of, especially the ones that people tend to really like, are typically movies released after a significant period of time has lapsed between the last installment. So with Halloween 18, I mean, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 was the last one before that, which I think was 2009. So you're dealing with a pretty large gap. With Halloween H20, Halloween 6 was only 3 years before this. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but I think that's a big part of why it was hyped, but not necessarily as hyped as something like Halloween 18 was, because they just had a Halloween movie with Michael Myers 3 years before this that had Paul Rudd in it. Like, how can you go wrong?
What a wild thing that exists.
It's another one we watch every year because it's just ridiculous. So Halloween kind of really didn't go anywhere. And I think that's a big part of maybe the only check I would say this movie doesn't have, as far as like even something like Psycho 2, which we're still right now kind of presenting as like potentially the original legacy sequel. There's 22 years between Psycho and Psycho 2, which is just crazy to me that in 1982 there was a studio that was genuinely like, so Psycho 2, right, guys? That's what we're all thinking. Okay. But
well, I still think it's a legacy sequel because the movie it's a sequel to is,
And I guess
30
that's the
years
gray
old, however
area.
old.
Like, Jamie Lee obviously hadn't been in the franchise since 1980. So, I mean, you're dealing with like an 18-year gap. So her coming back is definitely a big deal. But like the franchise itself just really hadn't gone anywhere.
It's similar to
Um,
Terminator Dark Fate, which I consider a legacy sequel, even though it's only a few years after Genesis, but it's a direct sequel to T2 and brings back Linda Hamilton. So
right. So,
actually a lot of similarities there. But yeah,
Fair enough.
What a heck of a thing. It's funny because you can find, like, I think the way I own this movie is I bought it in a 3-pack with Halloween 6, H20, and then Resurrections, where Resurrections is a direct sequel to this, but Halloween 6 is the culmination of a trilogy, but it's made by a different studio that I think went under, and then Dimension Films gets the rights. So they're like, well, clearly we got to finish off the story they made. Here's Halloween 6. Okay, what do we do now? And then they rebooted essentially with this legacy sequel. But now, because Dimension Films made these 3 specific movies, like those are the 3 that get packaged together. So if you were just like buy that off the shelf and watch them back to back, you'd be like, what is going on here? You'd be very lost.
So yeah, that I guess to give a little bit of backstory there real quick. So you mentioned that the Halloween franchise is a bit of a confusing thing to follow, because what you can say by and large about the Friday the 13th movies, there's one timeline, and he just keeps coming back. That the movies don't try to make it they don't try to make it into anything else, except that this dude just keeps coming back in increasingly baffling ways. They do ignore things sometimes, like there's that one where he turns into a baby at the end of it and they just kind of ignore it in the next movie. But like they're never like how, Friday the 13th Part 7 is a direct sequel to 2. They never do anything like that. Right. Nightmare on Elm Street's the same way. You got 6 movies that are the straight timeline, and then you do have your weird kind of meta sort of sequel that comes last. And but with this one, you have a weird thing that happens. Like, obviously, like you said, the first 2 go right together. 3 is more of what Carpenter envisioned for the franchise. He kind of saw Halloween as like an anthology series. Every year there could be a Halloween, but it was about something else. He never saw Michael Myers as like this recurring villain slasher. He never saw the character that way. And that's really, so he is involved on Halloween 2, but he doesn't direct it. He's just kind of like, all right, if you're going to do that, I'm going to hand it off. But then they were kind of like, all right, so now for Halloween 3, you can kind of do your thing. And so he basically shepherded Halloween 3 into production. And of course it flopped. I'd say, of course, it didn't have to flop, but it did. Underrated amongst a lot of fans of the franchise. They think there's a lot to like there, even though it doesn't have Michael Myers. But that leads to Halloween 4, which is the return of Michael Myers. That comes out in 1988. So there is a little bit of a gap we're working with there. But that introduces a character called Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, who featured in our Urban Legend episode briefly. And that
Isn't
kicks
Jamie
off
Lloyd the kid from episode 1 and Jingle All the Way?
Jake Lloyd.
Oh, okay. This is his brother. Sorry.
Yes, he's the brother of a fictional character. Anyway, so 4, 5, and 6 consist of what's sort of known as the Jamie Lloyd trilogy, similar to like the Tommy Jarvis trilogy that runs through Halloween 4, 5, or Friday the 13th, 4, 5, and 6. Basically, you're introduced to Jamie Lloyd, who is Laurie Strode's daughter, who we find out was killed off screen between Halloween 2 and 4. Don't know how. We just know that she was. And so 4 is Jamie Lloyd as a kid. 5, so 4 and 5, the characters played by Danielle Harris, very young. The end of 4 does a bit of the Friday the 13th Part 5, where you get an ending that's just like, oh, maybe the character's turning into like the new Michael Myers before they kind of retreated from that. And then 6 is a bit of a weird beast, because 6 does feature a grown-up Jamie Lloyd at the beginning, but she's pretty much killed off almost immediately, and that makes way for Paul Rudd to play Tommy Doyle, a character who is in the first Halloween, but is not played by Paul Rudd. So Halloween 6 is about Paul Rudd's Tommy Doyle teaming up with a variety of characters, including Donald Pleasance in his last outing as Loomis. In this weird, it's very weird. If you look up Halloween 6, you'll see how weird it is, but it involves like this cult, the cult of Thorn or whatever they call themselves, that like control Michael. And like there was this there's a lot of people that really go to bat for Halloween 6 because they think it tries to at least explain some of what makes Michael work. Give it a shot. See what you think. Results are mixed. But anyway, I can't say I blame the producers for kind of getting to that point and being like, you know what? Let's just wipe the table clean. And come back for this. And it's an odd idea. I don't really know if anybody had really done that at the time, done a sequel that ignored other sequels. But it is something that, as we've established now, happens quite frequently now.
I just love that the good naming convention of 4, 5, and 6 follows the Pink Panther naming convention. You have the Return of Michael Myers, Revenge of Michael Myers, and the Curse of Michael Myers, all of which are also Pink Panther movies. You should replace, Michael Myers with Pink Panther. So a little bummed that they didn't get to Son of Michael Myers. I think there's a lot of potential in that, but alas, it did not come to be.
And we're all worse for it.
Well, let's talk about this specific entry here, Andrew. Halloween H20. We can talk about that yet? I know we've talked about that already, but like, hashtag PP, what is going on with this title?
Just in case you're not understanding, folks, this movie's title is quite literally Halloween H20 20 years later. That is literally
they
the credited
force
title.
you to say the abbreviation. Like a lot of movies, like really insinuate. We talked about ID4 a lot. They really try to make these things happen, but like they baked it into the title. The official title is Halloween H20, which it's just the fact that H2O is water, right? That's why it's dumb. Like if that wasn't a thing, it would be maybe a little silly, heavy-handed, but it wouldn't be like so ridiculous to call it H2O. There's not even water in the movie. Like they don't drown him.
There's not even any water in this movie. She's drinking wine the whole time, which means you're not hydrating
you
properly.
Never see the water.
No, I agree. It's H2O. Like that was just supposed to sound cool. Because like the title assumedly was going to be Halloween 20 years later, and then they were just going to be like H2O for short. And I was like, well, why not H20 for short? I guess that didn't test as well with the focus groups. But yeah, guys, hashtag PP. This title's ridiculous.
The movie's released August 5th of 1998. Made on a budget. A little bit. I wonder. Here's my guess, and I have nothing to back this up. This is my gut. Like you release in early August, you have your run in August, and by October you're dwindling in theaters, and then you get one last like surge leading up to Halloween where people go back to theaters like, well, I got to see the Halloween movie. So you really kind of milk it for all it's worth, If you release it like right before Halloween, you've got a big opening weekend, and then it dies in November. So that's kind of, I think that's the rationale there.
No.
Did it work? I don't know. The movie's made on a budget of $17 million. At the box office, it brings in $75 million, which look, that's a hit. That's a profit. Like that's making money, but it's wild. This doesn't even cross the $100 million mark. And I know that's true up and down of these franchises. Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th. They're not making tons of money. It's just relative to the low budget, and then they have a long life on video. That's where they get the profits from. But I don't know. You kind of would expect, again, Jamie Lee Curtis coming back. We're kind of making this one different. I don't know. I expected to cross 100 million. I expected this to have a higher box office, but it's not bad. It's not great. It's $75 million. Critically, you could say it's split. It is technically certified rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. It holds a 54% critic score there. Audience score a little lower than I expected, just a 49% audience score. As you said, Andrew, like this is, if not a fan favorite, it's certainly one that's appreciated by a lot of fans of the franchise, but I don't know, not enough fans going to Rotten Tomatoes to leave their 2 cents, apparently.
Apparently not. So yeah, it is interesting. But what I will say, it's the highest grossing film in the franchise to that point. So this movie makes $75 million in total. The original Halloween, over the course of everything else, made about 70. None of the others even come close. Almost all of the others are pretty much just domestic releases. But you're looking at like micro budgets here too. Like the first Halloween cost $325,000 to make, and it makes $70 million. So that's an unmitigated success. Almost all of the Halloween sequels to this point were made for less than $5 million. So when you're, you'll look at like something like Halloween 6, and it only made $15 million, but it only cost $5 million. So it's a pretty good return on investment at the end of the day. Same with the previous installments. Halloween's 5 only made $11 million, but only cost $5 million. So 100% return. The previous one's even lesser. You got $2.5 million budgets with $20 million box offices. And that's the bread and butter of horror, though. It's the reason so many of these franchises have so many installments, is they're made for so cheap. And even a modest box office return is still a massive success. So to this point, though, we've got the highest budget of any film thus far, though, with $17 million. So it needed a higher return. And it does appear. $75 million worldwide, nothing to shake a stick at. The reception is interesting, though. So 54%, 67 reviews. The general consensus is, hey, it's a much better effort than a lot of the previous tries, but it's still just not Halloween. That the general response was that. Fans of the franchise liked seeing Jamie Lee back. They liked the kind of approach. But like you said, even the audience score, 49%, pretty split overall on whether people liked it or not. And here lately, I've seen a lot more people saying that they like this one a little bit less, maybe. Still being positive here, but they kind of maybe appreciate what 4 was doing a little bit more of trying to move the story in a new direction. And they kind of feel like this one, while there's a lot of cool stuff happening, maybe playing it too safe, too paint by numbers, too straightforward. And so I think that's definitely led to this one kind of maybe declining in some people's eyes since it came out. The novelty maybe having worn off a little bit. But the success speaks for itself. I mean, there is a direct sequel made to this, and that's a different story for a different day.
Different episode for, well, maybe the very same podcast.
See you guys next October.
Let's take a look at the creative team here. The movie is written by Robert Zappia and Matt Greenberg. Now, Matt Greenberg has done a lot of script doctor work and revisions on movies like Children of the Corn 3 and Mimic, also credited as a co-writer for The Prophecy 2. So definitely a lot of expertise and experience in the horror genre, but specifically in keeping franchises alive late into their lifespan. Like Children of the Corn 3 is not the first one you think of. Prophecy 2, and then of course here we have H20. So I think he has experience in a very specific field that comes into play here.
Yeah, definitely. Even looking at The Crow Salvation, which is the third Crow film, he was he's a co-producer on that. Yeah, so some interesting stuff there. Even recently has a screen story on the 2019 Pet Cemetery reboot. So quite an interesting collection of things to be responsible for. But I'm guessing in that era of writing kind of late stage horror sequels, probably I think even on Children of the Corn 3, it was revisions he was uncredited for. Probably got, became a studio favorite, just being able to do the things they needed to do in a timely manner, and got tapped here for Halloween H20, and Prophecy 2 is the same year. So getting that money.
Our other writer I found much less information on, Robert Zappia, mostly a TV writer up until this point on very just general TV shows, nothing horror specific that I could find. So this seems to be more of a step in his ladder as he continues on to the rest of his career. He'd go on to direct a few projects, but this is by far the biggest project he had taken up until that point. And while we are talking about writers, Andrew, we of course have to note that Kevin Williamson of Scream fame, the writer of Scream, the writer of I Know What You Did Last Summer, we've talked about him this month already, is involved creatively in this movie to what capacity is kind of hard to suss out. It seems like a treatment he had for a seventh Michael Myers movie is the basis that we have here, and he maybe gave some input throughout production, but not enough to get any kind of official credit. But his fingerprints are definitely on here.
Yeah, it's kind of it kind of depends on who you ask. He apparently came up with the story originally kind of working with the title of being called Halloween 7: The Revenge of Laurie Strode, which is a dope title. I'm sad.
Pretty cool. I like that. Yeah.
And his original story was situated as a sequel to the previous 6 films, basically. He was going to try to keep kind of everything in play with what he was doing. The old Grant Morrison Batman trick, as it's called. It all happened. Just how it happened might be a little bit strange.
Definitely what they called it back in 1998.
Yeah, absolutely. For a Batman run that hadn't happened yet. But he had kind of the idea of the faking the death and taking on a new identity was specifically done to kind of retcon the character's death in Halloween 4. So like they use it as the genesis for this story, but it was originally come up with as a way to get around the character's actual off-screen death. And originally the script was going to have some of those things be included as some references and things like that. Apparently, though, Kevin Williamson, when the time came down to it, did do rewrites in the character dialogue, apparently made alterations to the script, and then he actually comes up with what we'll call the paramedic storyline that deals with the ending of this film, which was apparently quite a point of contention for Jamie Lee Curtis for this film. We can talk about that a little bit more when we get to scenes, but apparently Kevin Williamson is the one who comes up with that. So his fingerprints are all over it in a way, but it's another one where it just feels like he was being pulled in so many different directions he couldn't quite just write the script, which is unfortunate. I'm curious what that would have looked like, but nonetheless, you can see he's all over this regardless.
The movie is directed by Steve Miner. Again, plenty of experience in the slasher field. He's the director of Friday the 13th Parts 2 and 3. So he directs the first time you see Jason in a hockey mask. He's the director of House, although sadly not House 2, the second story. Later would go on to direct Lake Placid. So you can bet we're going to talk about him again in our inevitable Big Animal Month coming at some point. And I should say also directed 4 episodes of Dawson's Creek. So he's got the horror down. He's got the hot young cast down. I mean, makes a lot of sense to be the director of H2O.
Yeah, I mean, you even look at like his previous credits of when he was a production assistant, assistant editor, a second unit director. You've got Wes Craven's Last House on the Left. You've got the original Friday the 13th. You've got A Stranger Is Watching. So he's everywhere. Everywhere. No stranger to this genre. Did do a few odd, dramatic type things in between, including the very strange movie Forever Young, which is written by a very young J.J. Abrams. But yeah, ultimately does get the nod here to be our director. There was, at one point, by Jamie Lee Curtis, mostly a hope to get John Carpenter involved. They apparently did ask him. Apparently he has said yes, but asked for a significant director's fee. Kind of demanded a multi-picture deal as well. And he saw that as kind of making up for the money he lost out on in the early years of the franchise, royalties, things like that he feels he was owed and did not receive. And apparently that is still a point, or for a long time, was still a point of contention between Carpenter and the Halloween producer, Mustafa Akkad. And then Akkad apparently heard the number and was like, that's ridiculous. And Carpenter was like, cool, peace. And Steve Miner comes on board. Jamie Lee Curtis really wanted John Carpenter and Deborah Hill to be involved, and expressed some regret later that they weren't able to make that happen.
Andrew, I think it's time that we just jump into this movie, Halloween H2O, 20 years later. All the best parts, all the positives, everything that we like, everything that works, Are you ready?
Yes.
"35 years after her brother murdered her sister and 20 years after he tried to murder her, Laurie Strode still lives in fear of Michael Myers returning to finish the job. Now living across the country and raising her teenage son, her greatest fear comes to pass as Michael has tracked her down to the school she works at, the same school that her son attends. On Halloween night, 4 students, a professor, a counselor, and a security guard must try and survive." Andrew, the runtime of this movie is sub 90 minutes. Is that right?
86.
86 with credits. That is wild. But this movie is so efficient. I think it's got that going to it for it. I mean, I think in general, slashers tend to be under 100 minutes. They don't really need to go longer than that. Friday the 13th, I think damn near every entry is 90 minutes. And that's good. I mean, like, you watch a slasher movie, you know what the audience is waiting for. They're waiting for that kill. You can only push that tension for so long before you start seeing the kills that you lose it and you get maybe boring. But this one, is even for a slasher movie, clocks in really short. And considering, you know, again, they brought back Jamie Lee Curtis. These days, when you would do that, it becomes a big prestige thing. But 98 is kind of just another entry in the Halloween franchise. You know why I think that is, Andrew? Why this one feels different than 2018, bringing her back? This one's a pre 9/11 movie. Halloween 2018 is after. That changes everything.
It's got to be. I don't know about that, Chris, but it definitely feels different. I will say this. Even I just looked. Halloween 18 is only like 106 minutes. So Halloween 18 still keeping it pretty efficient. I think it's some of the sequels there that actually get a little bit more, get a little longer, potentially moving into that post, that 2 hours plus kind of area where you're kind of deciding that things need to suddenly be way longer than they need to be. And now that I look, I'm wrong. Halloween Kills is 105 minutes. Halloween Ends is 111 minutes. It just feels 2.5 hours long. Hashtag PP. Yeah, you're right though. I you know, it happens with superhero movies a lot too. People will hear a movie is only 2 hours and they'll be like, ugh, you know, it's not going to have enough time. It's not going to be that. I'm just like, 2 hours is how long most movies should be. You don't need every movie. If every movie is a 2.5 hour epic, no movies are 2.5 hour epics. You know, sometimes 90, 100 minutes, that's all you need. Doesn't need to be longer.
Let's start by taking a look at this cast, Andrew. And of course, we're going to start with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the film, because every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Halloween H20 20 years later?
I think you got to go to the top. I think it's, for me, it's Jamie Lee Curtis, returning as Laurie Strode / Carrie Tate, as her assumed name is. I think I'm going for this for a number of reasons. One, within the movie itself, but also I think a huge part of why this movie was seen in the light that it was for so long by Halloween fans is solely because having Jamie Lee back adds a level of authenticity to the film that you just can't ignore. You know, she's one of the original Scream Queens, one of the original Final Girls, coming back to that franchise so much longer after the fact, which is not something that happens very often. You know, typically these characters don't usually survive long enough to get to come back for multiple installments. Adrienne King in Friday the 13th, it's a great example. I've told the kind of sad story that she didn't even realize she was being killed off in Friday the 13th Part 2, and then got kind of ghosted by the production staff after she shot her scenes. And to have a chance to come back that immediately adds authenticity to this film. It immediately elevates it. This movie, without Jamie Lee, would probably be very generic. But with her being here, it elevates it. It adds that level of authenticity. And she has a very interesting role to play here. Because she's trying to move on with her life, but you can tell that she hasn't. She still has nightmares about Michael Myers. She wakes up screaming. Her son has kind of unfortunately roped into this kind of lifestyle that she kind of has, where she kind of lives in fear constantly. He feels like he's being kind of smothered. And she finally realizes throughout the course of this film that maybe she needs to let up a little bit, let him have some fun, let him move on. And unfortunately, she picks the worst possible night to do that. The worst possible day. But when you add in those layers to the character, the kind of trauma that she's experienced, that she tries to keep buried, I think she brings a lot of layers to that kind of performance. You know, even just simple stuff where like she asks for another glass of wine at the restaurant when she still has a full one in front of her and stuff like that, where you're like, you're clearly not coping with this very well, are you? And I think it all works. And like I said, I think it adds a level of authenticity to this film that it certainly wouldn't have without her. So in that regard, straight to the top, Jamie Lee Curtis returning as Laurie Strode for the first time in 18 years.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, it has to be Jamie Lee Curtis. That is the magic of this movie. She is definitely set up to be the sort of game changer in the franchise, bring it back to what it once was. And I like diving into, you know, what would Laurie Strode be like all these years later? She's not certain that Michael Myers died. She saw him on fire, but as she says in this movie, she didn't stick around to see the ashes. You know, what is that going to do to a person? So I think she plays those early scenes very well, kind of being haunted by her past. And then she gets a chance to confront her fear or move past it. And how does she do that? She does it by trapping herself on this campus with Michael Myers and facing him down. And I got to say, I think I said it back on our Scream 3 episode that Neve Campbell as Cindy Prescott, I think that's the best final girl in the genre. But Laurie Strode, I mean, being either the OG or one of, depending on your slasher definition and chronology and what you want to count as a slasher, obviously great. I think Neve Campbell has just a lot of high quality movies that kind of helping her. But anytime in this franchise, in Halloween, where Laurie makes that turn, where she's like, I'm going to become the hunter, it is always awesome. It always gets me hyped. And in this movie, where she kicks the glass to take the axe out, I'm like, hell yeah, let's go. It doesn't even feel like a slasher at that point, because I feel like such a role reversal, and it becomes like a revenge flick where, again, the revenge of Laurie Strode would have been a rad title. But yeah, Andrea, yeah, I agree. Jamie Lee Curtis, she's one of the greatest of our time, of not just in the horror genre, but everything she chooses to do. I have a lot of respect for her as an actor, because I feel like, for one, she kind of takes roles all over the place as far as like indie movie, high profile, supporting, lead. She truly one of those actors where I feel like they just look at it as a job that they're really good at, and I always respect that. I think she's even said, like, I'm personally not a huge horror fan, but I appreciate what this franchise did for me. I'm happy to come back when it makes sense and turn in a good performance every time that she does. So, yeah, this being no exception. Of course, getting the Mark Strong Award, Jamie Lee Curtis.
What can you say? She's Jamie Lee.
Josh Hartnett's in this movie, Andrew, because it is released in 1998.
Not just in this movie, Chris. Introducing Josh Hartnett.
Does it say that?
Yes, it does.
I was trying to, again, some of the things that I forgot.
Film.
That's probably why I didn't remember he was in it, because when I watched this movie, I didn't know who the heck Josh Hartnett was. But, you know, this is leading right into things like The Faculty, which I'm a big fan of and saw a ton as a kid. Of course, Pearl Harbor, 40 Days and 40 Nights. I mean, the run that this guy had at the end of the 90s and early 2000s was pretty big. And this is, I guess, what kicks all that off. And who doesn't love a good Hartnett? I mean, he's got the goofy bowl cut where it's like obviously uncombed on the back of his head, like this
Oh my
iconic
God,
haircut you
this hair.
have through these movies.
This hair. It's like the back of his head has bedhead and the front doesn't, and nobody told him. Like it's how I fear I look every day when like I shower the night before. Like
he just doesn't care, Andrew. He doesn't even tighten up his tie in a school uniform.
That's how you
man.
know how cool he is, because he doesn't even tighten up his tie. But yeah, this is the first film by Josh Hartnett, or is it? It is, because The Faculty comes out at the end of the year. So this is the same year, but The Faculty comes out in December. The Faculty, a nice Christmas Day release in 1998.
Wow. Christmas Day. That's
I
wild.
had no idea. So he had a Halloween movie released in August, and then The Faculty released at Christmas. This dude was...
Again, Scream influenced movies in so many different ways. Like because the first Scream is released in December and becomes a huge hit. So now it's like, oh, we can do horror anytime. We can do horror in the holidays.
We
They
can.
gave it a shot with The Faculty.
Anyway, yeah, so this, I noticed that at the beginning. This movie is straight up introducing Josh Hartnett. He kind of dropped off face of the earth there for a while, had a big kind of run there at the late 90s, early 2000s, then kind of the mid-aughts there kind of looked like he stepped back a little bit and kind of stopped doing so much high-profile stuff. But I do believe right now we are in the Hartnett-essence, and his comeback is unfolding before our eyes. He was recently in two Guy Ritchie flicks, Wrath of Man and Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre, which I loved so much. And then just had to turn as Ernest Lawrence in Oppenheimer. So getting all over the place is Josh Hartnett now, but this is where it all began. And yeah, I wanted to talk to Liz after I finished watching it, and I was like, God, that hair. What is going on with it? Like, what is happening? And yeah, it's and he's got an interesting spot to sit too, playing the son of Laurie Strode. Did not return to the franchise, and now, unless somebody makes a legacy sequel to Halloween H20, never will. But imagine if somebody did that. We're making a direct sequel to Halloween H20.
Would not be surprised at this point, Andrew.
That would be wild. But and you can see, but he does a good job kind of portraying. I mean, it is teenage angst at the end of the day, but there is a lot of resentment he has towards his mom for kind of how much she has sheltered him for his entire life, all 17 years of it. And he's kind of ready to bust out. And so that's when she's kind of forced to realize in this movie that she kind of needs to let go a little bit. Otherwise, she's going to inadvertently send him away versus kind of, keeping that relationship open. So does a good job with that. And I'm glad he's back.
Well, let's go through the rest of the young cast while we're here. It is a Scream-influenced movie, so you've got to have this cast of teenagers that is going to be killed by our killer, most likely. But we have Michelle Williams as Molly Cartwell. This is Josh Hartnett's character's girlfriend. And talk about people I didn't realize when this movie until I went back to it. Michelle Williams is here. Not her first movie. I mean, she had acted throughout the 90s, was on Dawson's Creek. This is an early film role for her, but of course she goes on to have a very illustrious career and is just very critically acclaimed for her skills these days. But this is kind of just an early, she's the girlfriend in a slasher movie type role. There's not much to say about it other than that, other than I like that she gets to survive along with Josh Hartnett. Doesn't get kind of killed for no reason, so the script has that going for it.
Yeah, I can't believe you're just going to blow past that she was the young Syl in Species, which she is. But clearly, the most high-profile film debut one can make. But yeah, also was in a 1994 Lassie movie, which I didn't know existed. So fantastic. But I feel like it's now a requirement that all of these movies had somebody from Dawson's Creek in them. Like we've now, I think, literally, like most of these movies, more of them than haven't had somebody from Dawson's Creek in them. And she's the one here checking that box for us, just because.
But James Vanderbeek never does a slasher, right?
I don't know. That is
I
actually
mean, that would have been gold.
That would have.
Real missed opportunity by all involved.
Yeah, it really was. Let's see. I gotta look now. This makes for great.
Good podcasting here. You scrolling through the filmography of James Vanderbeek.
Yeah, I don't see him. Like, I guess he's in a movie called Final Draft in 2007, but like, he has a cameo apparently in Scary Movie. But like, yeah, it's he does not have. The closest I guess he gets is Varsity Blues, which is not a horror slasher at all.
That's not close at all, Andrew.
Not even close. But looks like he does some horror films later on. But by and large, kind of missed out on that. Yeah, I feel like we're a little worse off as a people for that never having happened. But who knows?
And then we have Adam Hannibird as Charlie. Now, he is Josh Hartnett's buddy. And as is the case with all of these social groups, you've got to have the character that you don't like. And this is the character I don't like. It just seems so inevitable that he's so horny all the time and making crude jokes and is just generally unlikable. I feel like he's checking the box of like class clown and the stoner. I feel like they kind of combined a lot of those the annoying character tropes into one. So of course he is the first to die, and you're kind of ready for that to happen, which just means that Adam is doing a good job at his role.
Yeah, this cast is pretty tight overall. Once we're on the school, there's basically 2 adults, a security guard, and 4 students, as you said. So, and he is the first one to go. Whole time I'm watching this, I was like, this guy looks familiar. I can't figure out why. And it's because he played the young Robin Williams in the 1990 film Jumanji. And I was like, that's what I know you from. 3 years before this. And yeah, he aged a lot in those 3 years, which you do when you're a kid. But also was in the Ang Lee film The Ice Storm, which is a fun, wholesome Thanksgiving viewing for the whole family. Apparently now kind of works as a writer. Has apparently gotten writing gigs on Fringe, The Morning After, Brain Food Daily. Cool. But like you said, basically plays the... they put a lot of tropes into one character, I guess, so that you can... you have to kill 6 people if the 6 unlikable people are all the same guy. And
yeah,
it's that's what happens here. So he is the first one to die. It's pretty brutal, but yeah. And then his girlfriend finds his body in a dumbwaiter. It's pretty gnarly, but yep.
I would say I think one of the more brutal deaths is actually going to be his girlfriend. That's of course the character Sarah Wainthropp. Do you even hear that last name in the movie? Her name is Sarah. She's played by Jodie Lynn O'Keefe. And again, we're kind of combining a few tropes. She's kind of the goth girl. She's the dark-haired girl, which means she's going to die before the light-haired girl. She's the friend of the girlfriend. All those things put together, which means that she ain't making it out of this movie. She finds her boyfriend's body and soon meets the same fate at the hands of Michael Myers. She gets tortured quite a bit before her ultimate demise, and I mean, we'll get to scenes, but it's probably one of my favorite kills of the movie, the reveal of her kill.
Oh, yeah. But,
the movie is a little condensed in that way. You're right. I mean, 4 teenagers isn't a lot for a slasher movie, especially when you have 2 of them that are going to survive at the end. But she is not one of the survivors. Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, she would go on to do plenty more acting credits. A lot of success on television in shows like Prison Break and The Vampire Diaries.
And even while this comes out, she's in a main role on the show Nash Bridges. And basically
such a dad show.
Yeah, that's the show your dad watches.
Yes.
But she plays Cassidy Bridges, the daughter of the aforementioned Nash Bridges. So was on that show quite heavily, but But yeah, another character that they kind of mashed some stuff together. But yeah, she gets first she finds her boyfriend's dead, and then we'll talk about it more in scenes. But yeah, it's pretty gnarly. Probably one of the most complicated things Michael's done. Where when you see the body, you're like, you did a lot of work for this. Like you're more dedicated to your work than I thought you might be, Michael. But plays the role that she needs to play perfectly well.
And then, as far as the adults we have on campus, you have Adam Arkin playing Will Brennan, who is dating Laurie Strode. You could say they kind of have like a secret affair going on. She reveals who she really is late in this movie to him, so things are getting kind of serious. And then he gets killed by Michael Myers because, of course, he does. But the character is pretty fun. I like his relationship to the students. He's kind of plays that, I'm a cool counselor role pretty well. I suspect they couldn't get Tim Curry for the role, so they cast Adam Arkin.
What?
I don't know if you got that vibe. That's exactly what I got. Maybe it's the salt and pepper hair with the goatee, but I got 90s Tim Curry.
Such a low bar that someone has to pass. He's got gray. He's got salt and pepper hair and a goatee. That means you're Tim Curry, right?
I mean, couldn't you imagine? There's the scene where, like, he walks in on the girls, and clearly, like, they're up to no good. They've been drinking. And he's like, "Oh, what are you up to?" They're like, "Oh, we're gonna have a wild night on the town. You want to join us?" And he goes, "Oh no, I can't. I'm getting my nipples pierced later." Couldn't you imagine Tim Curry delivering that line?
I'm getting my nipples pierced later.
Like he rubs his chest a little bit.
I can't. I don't want to see it, Chris. It's so weird. Whew, man. Anyway, no, not the vibe at all I got from this character. Yeah, he's another. You look at his filmography, just a character actor of all types, has been on all sorts of different shows and movies. All the way up until now, was just recently in the Nicolas Cage film Pig, but probably at the time was known mostly for Chicago Hope, which I believe he was a relatively main character. But here he plays the sort of guidance counselor that's trying not to be a counselor to Laurie Strode, and unfortunately meets his demise at the hands of Michael Myers. After telling her repeatedly that she has nothing to worry about. So I'm just saying, dude, you're not good at your job.
And then LL Cool J is in this movie, Andrew. Dude, I love LL Cool J. For one, he's always just stuck with the name LL Cool J, which is, it's ridiculous to say, it's ridiculous to write. Stands for Ladies Love Cool James. It's even when like you say it all out loud, it still doesn't sound cool, but he makes it work. Massive respect for the guy. I mean, it is probably lost on some younger people now, but he is truly a pioneer in the genre of rap. One of the biggest crossover rappers in like the pre-gangster rap era. And then he makes this transition into acting, has a very successful acting career with supporting roles in movies, and then goes, I should know this. He's, as I'm praising him, he's one of like the CSIs, right? Or NCIS. He has a long role eventually on a television series that I know is really big.
NCIS Los Angeles with alum of the show, Chris O'Donnell.
Of course. And I feel like he did that before a lot of other rappers like follow suit, before Ice-T is on SVU. So I feel like he's always like one step ahead of his peers. And I like him anytime he shows up. I think he's very funny, very charismatic. This movie being no exception. His character is the one that has the line that I used in the intro of this podcast, because there's this running bit where he is not only trying to write an erotic novel, but he's constantly pitching it to his girlfriend over the phone, a girlfriend we never see but only hear her feedback. And she always talks about how corny his writing is. And then he has epiphany at the end to make it an erotic thriller. That's the movie I want. I want to see the movie that he eventually writes, the story this character eventually writes. But anyway, yeah, cool. LL Cool J, he's great. We'll talk about him again because we've got to cover Deep Blue Sea on this podcast one day, but I love it.
So, do you want to hear a story about LL Cool J regarding Halloween?
Well, of course I do, Andrew.
So, it was years ago. I remember reading a post from basically, there's a writer I follow on Facebook. His name is Joe Harris. He writes comics. He's written some movies, a bunch of different things. But what he was going to do, it was Dimension basically asked him to write a pitch years ago that was going to be a sequel to Halloween Resurrections. It was not going to be the Rob Zombie reboot that followed. But what it was going to focus on was LL Cool J's character from this and Busta Rhymes' character from Halloween Resurrections teaming up together in a new movie where they face Michael Myers. And I'm going to read some excerpts here.
Hang on. Who's pitching this, Andrew?
Joe Harris.
Joe Harris. It sounds like a white guy. It's a white guy?
It is.
And his idea is like, hey, wait a minute. We've had 2 rappers in these past 2 movies. What if they teamed up? That's his big genius idea?
I don't know if I want to be that cynical about it. I don't know
I'm
that
just
I want to go that
stating
route.
facts here, but all right, continue with this pitch. What's his big? They team up. What happens?
He wrote the movie Darkness Falls, for those of you that may have heard of that film.
The Killer Tooth Fairy movie.
Yes. So he was pitching this on 2 Dimension. So anyway, basically the gist of it, both men are down on their luck. They don't have a little bit to lose. But they both credit Michael Myers for being responsible for their current positions in life. But they are both invited to be witnesses to the execution of Michael Myers by the state of Illinois after he is finally convicted and sentenced to death.
By the way, cool idea for a title. Halloween, the execution of Michael Myers.
Anyway,
Thanks.
I agree.
Sorry, I interrupted. Sorry, continue.
So they watch him die, and it's an intimate audience of media, law enforcement, survivors, and families of victims. And Michael Myers are there. But as they are watching him be killed, they both have a sneaking suspicion that it is not actually Michael Myers being killed, because it turns out it wasn't Michael Myers that was actually killed. Basically, we are then introduced to this character named Randall, who's kind of a publisher, millionaire type in the mold of William Randolph Hearst, who's readying a book launch on Michael's life and murderous times. And he basically kidnapped Michael Myers for the sake of the promotion of this book, and actually has the real Michael Myers being held captive. And basically through his money and influence was able to have an imposter executed instead. Naturally, you can see where that goes. Michael Myers does not stay captured. He eventually breaks out, and then that's where Freddie and Ronnie, which are their characters' names, but Busta Rhymes and LL Cool J, would re-enter. Basically, Michael Myers, and basically it would be the 2 of them versus Michael Myers in the city of Chicago. And
in the city of Chicago.
Because these all are in Illinois, to be fair.
Sure.
They just never
Well,
mix it up there.
this one's in California.
Well, true, yes. But anyway, I just feel like we lost out on having Busta Rhymes and LL Cool J fight Michael Myers in the city of Chicago. I think that was a real loss for society, for America, and just for the world at large. And I'm kind of sad this movie doesn't exist. To be fair, Joe Harris admittedly, openly says, this is not good, guys.
I mean, slasher movies, horror in general, but especially slashers, they're such a strange thing that, the good ones are good, the bad ones are good, they're almost all entertaining. It's a weird, the quality scale is totally different for a slasher movie. I don't know why it is. I try not to examine it too much, but you're right. I would have loved to have seen that. I'm glad this franchise eventually gets to Halloween 2018, and that's among my favorite in the series, but I also would have loved to see that wild thing, as potentially problematic as it might have been. That sounds like a good time.
It could have been like Jason Takes Manhattan, where like Michael takes Chicago, but hopefully they actually shot most of the movie in Chicago, as opposed to Jason Takes Manhattan, which is mostly not in Manhattan.
I just, maybe it's cynical, but I feel like it would have had a title like Halloween, Michael Myers in the Ghetto or something like that. Like I feel like they would have.
This would have been early 2000s. I think we would have been a little bit
exactly.
more...
It would have before 9/11. If it, after 9/11, you can't get away with that.
It would have been after
stuff,
9/11 because I think Resurrection is 2002.
Okay, so no, they you're right. They wouldn't have got away with that title.
This isn't Leprechaun in the Hood here, Chris. Don't worry.
That's the vibes I'm getting from it. But heck of a thing.
Heck of a thing. But yeah, so, like I said, I just feel like we're all worse off for not having that. But the Halloween Resurrection, which I don't know if we'll talk about one day, but Busta Rhymes has one of my favorite lines in the whole series. But I can't say it out loud for all of our younger viewers, listeners.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
We will.
Andrew.
One way or another.
All right, there's two more members of this cast I want to acknowledge. First of all, a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in this movie. He's one of the first kills. He's in our opening scene. He is, I don't know, is this the same? This got to be the same time as Third Rock from the Sun. It's still on TV at this time, right? I mean, this is before 10 Things I Hate About You. The dude is young. He looks like maybe 15.
Yeah, this Third Rock I think was 96 to 01, so this would have been right in the thick of that.
There you go. And it's just fun to see him pop up. Anything really to say about his performance other than he's kind of smarmy and gets what's coming to him? Maybe.
I mean, he steals beers from his neighbor's fridge. This doesn't mean he deserves an ice skate in the face, Chris. I'm not even sure why he dies. But yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's just one of those weird little, oh, hey, just point at the screen because you're like, I know that guy.
And speaking of, oh, hey, point at the screen, Janet Leigh is in this movie. She gets the special credit of Janet Leigh as Norma. And Andrew, there's so much going on here. So Janet Leigh is Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, IRL. The two characters get a little bit of dialogue together. Janet Leigh, as Norma, says, if I could be maternal for a moment, and gives her some advice. Janet Leigh, of course, depending again on how you categorize these things, could be considered the original Scream Queen. She is in the 1960 film Psycho, famously the shower kill. If you're familiar with that, that's Janet Leigh. That's why the casting of Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween was so fun at the time. And now you kind of got a reverse of that with Janet Leigh coming into the Halloween franchise. Of course, the character's name is Norma, like Norma Bates. And you get to see the car that she drives in this movie. And it's the exact car from Psycho, down to the make, model, and license plate. So they're just having a lot of fun here, both with the relationship among the actors and, of course, the respective franchises that some of the most famous films are from. It's good. It's
there's a couple of
good stunt casting.
It is. I like it a lot. There's a few other, the soundtrack, the orchestrations by John Ottman there have a few odes to Bernard Herrmann's Psycho.
Did you just mix
soundtrack.
Nod, note, and ode together?
Yep,
So one
I did.
word? Is that what's happening?
Node spelled Node, folks. But Bernard Herrmann's soundtrack to Psycho gets some shout outs here, especially when she's walking to the car there. There's one point where the friend Charlie, Adam Hanbird, says that Josh Hartnett's still going to be living with his mom in 20 years, working in a motel in the middle of nowhere. And at one point when Laurie Strode comes back after finding out her son and his friend were outside the school, she kind of dresses down LL Cool J for letting him out, and as they drive away, he just goes, psycho. Which, odd thing to say in that moment. I could have thought of like 9 other things. So I was like,
honestly, that stood out to me when I saw it. I'm like, who's the psycho? Why? Like, what was so crazy about it? And then I didn't even put together they were trying to do
that's clearly
there,
what I assumed was happening there.
Yeah.
Some nods and some hints there, which is cool. One more bit of casting I would like to point out, because it is another returning cast member. The only other returning cast member in this film, and it
Can
is
I guess?
Nancy. Yes,
Wait a minute. Is it Nancy Stevens?
yes.
That
So-
wasn't going to be my guess. I was just, I see we have Chris Durand as Michael Myers, and I know we rarely have repeat Michael Myers. I was curious if maybe he had played the role before, but
He had not, but Nancy Stevens played Marion Chambers in Halloween and Halloween 2. She also returns as that character in Halloween Kills, as one of like the legacy characters kind of returning and paying homage to, the anniversaries of Michael's kills. But she does get a brief return here as that same character in our intro. She is kind of the stand-in for Loomis, given that Donald Pleasance was no longer with us. They use her character as kind of the cipher in that regard, and she meets a very unfortunate end at the beginning. But obviously just a bit part. You could have easily cast almost anyone for that, but they did go to the lengths to bring back Marion Chambers for that. And I thought, the character of Marion Chambers and Nancy Stevens along with it. And I thought that was pretty cool.
pretty cool indeed, Andrew. I agree. I appreciate the shout out. But you know what? Now it's time that we just jump into this movie, specifically the best parts of the movie and our favorite scenes. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is the best scene in, last time I get to say it, Halloween H20 20 years later?
Well, when you're talking about a movie like Halloween H20 20 years later, Chris, and you're asking about all of the scenes, and you're thinking about what the best, what's the moment that Halloween H20 20 years later is firing on all cylinders? Sorry, folks, I'm just drawing this out for comedic effect.
Do we have to say H2O? You mentioned that like Halloween H2 or H20 might have been a little less silly. Is there like a voice in the trailer that nailed into our brain Halloween H2O? Or is that
Maybe
just
you
the
and I
first
have
thing you
just
think
been-
when you see it?
I assume everybody, well, because people will still, like, when you're saying the number 0, people will still use O, I guess, interchangeably, But
yeah.
I don't know.
But 20, I mean, it's 20 years.
It is.
But then you say Halloween H20 20 years later. So I guess
Right.
that's
So
why
I think that was probably
H2O.
why.
Okay.
Folks, don't ever make the mistakes they did when naming Halloween H20 20 years later.
Look, hashtag positivity podcast, though, I prefer this to just calling the movie Halloween.
That's true. Although, like I said, Revenge of Laurie Strode was right there.
That also would have been very cool.
I think that one, it's interesting, though, because like it would set this tone that like it would set more like Halloween 18 could have been called The Revenge of Laurie Strode, because that's more what that movie is. Like she's been ready for it and she's waiting. Whereas this one, it's not really the vibe. It's kind of like when George Lucas decided episode 6 should be Return of the Jedi, not Revenge of the Jedi, because he's like, Revenge of the Jedi is just, it's giving a connotation to what they're doing that he didn't really think was apt. Anyway, anything beyond Halloween H20 20 years later would have been better, is our point here. But I gotta go with our climax. From the moment she like sends Michelle Williams and Josh Hartnett out the gate and then smashes the gate with the rock and closes it down, and we're basically in the final Laurie Michael fight, because like you said, at that point the tone switches, and now it's no longer Jamie Lee Curtis getting hunted by Michael. It's basically Michael getting hunted by Jamie Lee Curtis, and I just think that's a really cool flip of the script. I think it's how that should have gone. It's the kind of ending I want. I do really like the way this unfolds, obviously, in Halloween 18. You could say that it's more effective, but I do really like that moment here, where not just does she send them away, she basically is like, I'm breaking this gate because there is no other way out of this facility, I assume. But just that, even if, you could watch it wrong and be like, there's clearly another exit, but you're watching the movie wrong. But the symbolism that it makes of, this is ending here. Either he gets me or I get him. This is it. And it's the same idea they do in Halloween 18, just very, very differently. But I like the symbolism of that. Like you said, when she kicks the thing, pulls the axe out, she's doing all that stuff. It's just so cool. It's badass. It's awesome. And she gets the upper hand. She eventually dispatches our boy Michael, seemingly, but then realizes that she's not going to fall for that. So this is where things get a little bit hazy. I think this might have been where there were some reshoots, some redos, and I think this is where they were definitely talking about having issues with the ending of the film. So if you don't mind, Chris, I'm going to go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say I'm basically agreeing with best scene of the movie, but I do want to specifically, I think, say my favorite scene is her seeing him on the gurney, being loaded into the ambulance and deciding that's not good enough. So she hijacks the ambulance with his body in it and drives off. I love the idea of the character being like, I have to see him definitively killed or I will never rest, and taking that into her own hands to make sure it happens. Now, behind the scenes, as you're about to get into, there's a lot going on here. But in the movie, as we see it, I like this choice by the character, and I like giving this movie a definitive end to Michael Myers. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk to get around it, but I like the way it plays out.
So, and mine kind of builds into that, even though this does definitely present itself as more of the classic epilogue. But this is where I'm definitely feeling like there were some reshoots, because first off, they definitely make it seem like LL Cool J is dead, and then he's not dead. He kind of magically reappears right at the end here.
Here's the best part, though, Andrew. You see him in the end. He's got like a bandage on his head. He's on the phone, and that's when he has the idea, oh, it's going to be a thriller. And while he's on camera, that's what he talks about. He's talking to his girlfriend, whoever, and he's like, oh, yeah, I get it. It's going to be a thriller. As soon as he's off screen, you just hear a line, yeah, the bullet just grazed me. And they're like, that's not what he was talking about on camera. Like, it's like, oh, we got a ADR line in there to explain how he's walking around, because the audience can't figure it out. Yeah.
But anyway, wild stuff, just tremendous. But anyway, so there was some disagreements over the ending of this movie. So apparently Mustafa Akkad has a clause. So he owns the rights to Halloween, basically, and he the Akkad estate now, because I think he's no longer with us. They license the Halloween rights. There's no studio that owns the Halloween rights. So Blumhouse Universal licensed them for the most recent trilogy. These are Dimension, various different groups over time. Miramax, I think, just won the rights to them this time, so I'm sure we're going to get some new thing. But apparently, he has a clause that legally does not allow the writers to kill Michael Myers off. Like, he has a clause in his films. Obviously, that got, somehow amended for something like Halloween Ends. I'm not trying to spoil it too much for folks, but Michael seemingly meets a very definitive end in that film. They liquefy the man, but so that was a point of contention, because apparently Curtis really wanted this movie to effectively function as an ending to the story. She did not want the film to do an ending that implied there would be more. She knew there would be more, but she wanted this film to be a closed loop, basically. Which I respect. I actually respect that a lot. I see her saying, like, I want to come back, but I want to make this seem very definitive. So this is a point of contention to apparently the level that Curtis almost left the project just weeks before filming, because they apparently could not agree on how to make everybody happy. Akkad was basically saying, you can't kill Michael. She was saying, I need the ending of this movie to be definitive. So this introduces what becomes known as the paramedic storyline, which is it is a storyline that is only revealed in the sequel.
Okay, so we should say, here's how it plays out in this movie as a refresher, or maybe you haven't seen it.
So anyway, yes.
His body gets loaded into the ambulance. She steals the ambulance. She hops in, she drives. It's just her and Michael Myers in the back in a body bag. She keeps checking her rearview mirror to see if he's alive. Of course he is. The body bag starts moving. I don't know what her original plan was, but once he emerges from the bag, she slams on the brakes, sends him flying through the windshield. She runs him over with the van. The van tumbles down a hill. It ends up pinning Michael Myers to a tree. She walks up with an axe. They have a moment that reminds me of the end of Heat, where they almost hold hands, which Hashtag PP. I think it's a little too far in both instances. And then she lobs off his head with an axe. And you see the
Awesome.
masthead roll. So cool. Yeah, I love that. And then, honestly, the final shot where she's just like closing her eyes and like breathing very heavily, and then cut the credits and the score kicks in. Man, I love the end of this. But as you said, they have to have a way for Michael Myers to be alive in the end. So, Andrew, how did they pull that off with such a definitive ending here?
So, in one of the more convoluted explanations here, this is something that within the frames of this film is not revealed. As far as you know, watching this film, at the end of this movie, Laurie Strode beheads Michael Myers. Awesome. Straight up, cool as heck. No notes. Awesome. However, 4 years later, in Halloween Resurrection, it is revealed, and this was the genesis of Kevin Williamson, and then they shot this footage the day after H2O's principal photography ended, according to the editor. Basically, they pre-shot this footage for Halloween Resurrection the day after H2O's production ended. But it is revealed that at some point between when he seemingly is dead and gets loaded into the gurney, Michael Myers switches places with one of the paramedics and like crushes the dude's throat or something, which is why he can't talk and be like, yo, don't kill me. So Laurie Strode in this movie kills Michael Myers, but it is revealed in Halloween Resurrection that no, she killed a random paramedic.
Which, of course, undercuts the catharsis. I mean, you know that's got to
Dare
continue.
Dare you say it undercuts the entire thing?
But I will say, I don't know if this is giving the movie credit or whatever, but when you watch the end of this movie with that knowledge in mind, I mean, I guess the pieces are all there. Like
a
whenever
little bit,
he comes,
like he holds up the hand and like he's not trying to like connect with her. He's trying to stop her. Like he's not trying to like, yeah.
And
so
the first thing he does when he comes to is he feels his head and feels that the mask is on, kind of like a "where am I? What's going on?" kind of thing, which doesn't really play as Michael Myers. But when you have the knowledge that it's not him, you kind of understand that. Maybe Myers super glued it to his face. I don't know why he couldn't rip it off. But I guess even if he did pull the mask off, she doesn't know what he looks like. So I guess that wouldn't have really saved him anyway. So
those eyes. Look in the eyes. Anyway, it is a deeply complicated way to basically make everybody happy. And like you said, it sets up the beginning of Resurrection, where Jamie Lee Curtis does briefly return again as Laurie Strode. But yeah, it is, like I said, another conversation for another day. But I really like this within the bubble of H2O. I think the catharsis is really great. I think it works really well. And like I said, it flips the movie. It flips it on its head again. Like that's another moment where she's like, no, he doesn't get to drive this. I'm literally going to drive this car. But the fact that she takes the agency back and she's like, she sends her kid away. She crushes the gate controls. Nobody's getting out. Nobody's getting in. I'm finishing this. And then even when she thinks it's done, she goes one step further and finishes it for good. And that's cool. That's really cool. The way she acts here, like you said, kicking the glass, getting the axe, straight up lobbing his head off with an axe. It's just cool. It's the kind of stuff that obviously, like I said, they go way harder, kind of making her much more hardened in Halloween 18. But I do really like the approach here that she's trying to move on, struggling so hard, even 20 years later. But when the chips are down, it's on. And she's going to finish this. And that's just cool. There's no other way to slice it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's great. This is what I remember watching this as a kid. I remember her chopping his head off and me being like, whoa, like, how do they keep making so many of these? Like, this is what happens at the end of these movies. He gets killed. And kind of, yes. I mean, that's just kind of the corner you back yourself into when you have a slasher franchise go on and on and on. Like, at some point, either you make the killer supernatural or you come up with these backdoor ways that they actually survive whatever trap you put him in. I mean, we see it happen in Halloween 2018, and then the explanation happens in Kills, or how they got out of that. Personally, I love the one at the end of Kills. Kind of spoilers for Halloween Kills. If you don't want to hear it, fast forward. But there's a point at the end of that movie where he's dead to rights, surrounded by a group of people, and you're like, well, there's no way he's going to get out of it. And you don't have to wait till the next movie to find out what happens. He just pulls a knife out of his own back and cuts everybody and just fights his way out of it because he's Michael Myers and no one beats him with a butcher knife. Like, I love the idea of them being just like, he just kills them all and gets away. That's one of my personal favorite kind of ways of getting out of killing Michael. But yeah, again, it's something the franchise is always going to have to keep facing over and over again. All in all, I like what they came up with, because when you're walking out of theaters in 1998, you saw a satisfying conclusion to the Laurie Strode, Michael Myers story, regardless of what they made after it. It totally works. But I want to talk about, like you said, the tone change after she decides to hunt him down. Because it's not really so much horror at that time. It's revenge, and it's like a fight. Like when she's wandering the hallways of the school looking for Michael Myers, and he lowers himself from the ceiling with one arm, like hanging from a pipe. Like, the strength of this man, ridiculous. But I feel like that's not like a horror. Like, no one's scared to see him do that. You're just like, oh man, the fight's about to break out. Like, you're just hyped for this combat happen between these two characters, and that's kind of the tone the rest of this movie. You have her boyfriend, not Tim Curry, get the gun out of her hand and shoot the shadowy figure he sees walking around the corner. But of course, it turns out to be LL Cool J and not Michael Myers. It's not really horror stuff at this point. It's just again, just revenge. But I do like, just while I'm talking about that scene specifically, her boyfriend, again, I should just look at the character's name, because you roll your eyes every time I say Tim Curry. God, what's his name? Where's my cast?
Will Brennan.
Her boyfriend, Will Brennan, the counselor, gets what I would consider a classic Michael Myers kill. He gets the butcher knife in the gut, or I think it's the back this time, and then lifted up by Michael Myers.
Yep.
Again, this man's strength is insane, but just to see the man like shake and die on the knife, hoisted in the air, it's good stuff, Andrew.
It is, but I guess in that regard, we need to talk about Sarah Wainthrop's death, because I don't think that we did really explain all the things that Michael does there. Because, whoa.
Yeah, that is
Whoa.
wild. So, like, she finds her boyfriend stuffed into a dumbwaiter, which we see several times in this movie. The kids travel via dumbwaiter. I would never, would never climb into a little box that's only hoisted by this literal rope. No, thank you. But she finds her boyfriend dead in there. To escape Michael, she has to climb in with her dead boyfriend. Gonna need some therapy if she survived, but she doesn't. As she's climbing out on a different floor, Michael cuts the rope and it smashes onto her leg. This is, well, I was going to say it's the most gruesome part of her death, but I guess the final end with her body is, but it almost snaps her leg off. Like, there's like almost exposed bone. Yeah, there's like meat hanging off as she's dragging her body. Like, that is just gnarly. But we don't see her actually die. We just see the aftermath whenever Josh Hartnett flips on a light switch. And she's in the closet. She's hanging from the wire that connects the light bulb. The light bulb turns on. How do you say, like, inside of her body? Like, she lights up from within. Like, realistically, none of it makes any sense, but it's such a cool visual just to see her body hanging with the glow of the light inside. I don't know. Michael Myers he takes pride in his art, in his craft. You got to give him that.
Yep, he does. That is
makes a jack-o'-lantern out of her,
which, lines up the dude. And you think about some of his weirder kills, like the one in the first movie where he puts the sheet over and then puts the glasses on over it to like trick the woman into thinking he's somebody he's not, like stuff like that. Michael's got a little bit of sass in him, and you know what? I'm here for it.
He's a little stinker.
It's just that guy that makes you go, "Oh gosh, that Michael." Oh man, I'm gonna, I won't go as far as to say boys will be boys because that's a gross statement, folks. Don't say it. But I'm glad that you talk about these killers not having a personality. It was that sort of stuff that gave Michael a little bit of a personality.
Yeah.
And so seeing little shades of it, he very much became like a silent, Jason-esque killer by some of our later sequels. But to just throw in a little bit of that weird gnarliness here, I'm into it. So good stuff. But yeah, just brutal. Like, just you turn on the light, it's like, ugh, how do you even react to that? Turn these back off.
Andrew, I mean, once they turn the light on and like sparks start flying and stuff, dude, imagine the smell.
Oh,
Just
man. Man, I was wondering how I was going to fit that into this.
There it is.
There it is.
There's some comedy in this movie. Like, I mean, we already talked about LL Cool J and his erotic story he's trying to write.
Yep.
Shortly after, I mean, the dude is just killing me with his lines. Because shortly after his round melon breast, and then like his girlfriend rightfully calls him out on his horrible men writing women stereotypes that he's hitting, and she's like, that is ridiculous. Round, like what, like watermelons, like cantaloupes, like what are you talking about? I love like all the sash that she gives him. But right after that, Josh Hartnett walks into his little security booth and like startles him in his line. I mean, I'm gonna have to edit it to hell, but he literally goes, "Oh, fuck me, shit." So good.
Oh man,
probably
so
how
good.
I would react.
I'm sure, absolutely certain.
Not
how I'd
enough.
react.
Not enough people in these movies, like when they see Michael, like say what you would actually say whenever you're startled. Like you would let out some pretty ridiculous curses.
I mean, at bare
as we
minimum, every time I'd see him, I'd be like, "Fuck!" Like just every time. Like there's no way.
Yeah.
Like
That or fuck.
that's just me running down the hallway. Like just fuck. Turn around, he's right there, son of like just like there's no way. Like
Yeah.
and maybe in the moment when you're like actually terrified, you're not thinking to say quippy swear words, but I like to think I would. I'd like to think I would.
To me, that's not quippy. Whenever you
That's
comment
not quippy.
on
That's
like
just reaction.
that's just like a gut. I had this teacher in high school, I'll never forget, who called them monosyllabic grunt words. Like it's just the guttural primal thing you blurt out whenever you're just startled or pure emotion.
Yep.
It's good. It's exactly
Pretty much
what it is.
every time I get hit with a hockey puck and it actually hurts, it's always some swear words of some kind.
Makes sense.
Last scene I want to shout out is our intro. We mentioned it a couple of times. That's where Marion Whittington, as she's called here, originally Marion Chambers, drives home in her fancy gold hatchback in Langdon, Illinois. I'm guessing a short stone's throw from Haddonfield.
Isn't it weird that they just didn't make it Haddonfield? Like, would that have built tension if you're just like, this is Haddonfield, Illinois?
I don't know, man. I didn't write the thing.
Sorry,
Kevin Williamson,
PP.
where are you? Anyway, she comes home, basically finds her front door open. And at that point, she is smart enough, at least seemingly, to not go in. Which, it's, again, we're seeing some character show some smarts. This is when she finds Jimmy and Tony, I think is his friend's name, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and his buddy. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt ends up going into the house and searching around, and you're kind of waiting. You see some hints, his blushes. Ultimately, all he does is steal some beers out of the fridge and take a bite out of a cookie and inadvertently trash her kitchen. So maybe he did have it coming, I guess, when you really think about it. But anyway, he searches the house, doesn't find anything. Him and his buddy leave, go back to their house. She goes inside. Lights don't work. She has a brief moment where she kind of enters, but then she freaks out. She runs out. So we're really ratcheting up the tension here. You clearly know where this is going. You know what's going to be happening. I do like that the character is being relatively smart. Like, she runs out of the house when she's very clear that something is amiss. The doors start opening on their own. She just gets out. So she runs next door and unfortunately finds that our boy Joseph Gordon-Levitt now has a hockey skate through his face. And as she is trying to get out of the house at that point, she runs into Tony's body. And I don't remember exactly what happened to him, but probably a knife to the back or something like that.
The classic, she opens the door and he's standing there, but he was actually just propped against the door and he
just falls in. Because that's how physics works, folks.
Yes.
But then she's kind of running and she gets to the window. The cops are pulling up right as this is happening. She tries to basically tell the cops. She says Andy. I don't know if that's supposed to be important or not, if that's just the cop's name, because she knows all the cops in this town. But she tries to call out that he's bad. He's not dead, before she ultimately is overtaken by Michael and killed. And then the cops, unfortunately, go to her house, not this house first, which gives Michael time to steal Jimmy's car and drive off. And they don't say anything about it.
Typical cop stuff. Show up hours after the call, too late to actually do anything.
Yeah, and then watch the killer drive away in a car and don't do anything about it.
Guy looks awfully pale in that car.
Gosh, is that real hair? That's the worst wig I've ever seen. Dude, you look like you haven't slept in weeks, years even. But I do like this scene a lot. I like that Nancy Stevens gets a little bit to do here. She shows some agency, she shows some intelligence, isn't just falling for all the classic tricks. Thinks she runs to a safe place, turns out it's not, ultimately leads to her demise. But this is our reintroduction to Michael Myers. And I think, like you said, I don't know that you probably could have done this scene in a way where you kind of held back that he was Michael Myers, because the movie does hold it back pretty much until he arrives at the school. I think it would have been easy enough to kind of hold back Michael and kind of make that first face-off between Michael and Laurie have a really big impact. But for what this scene is doing, reintroducing Michael Myers, I think it's pretty good. Obviously, the hockey skate to the face, stuff like that, we're seeing more of those weird kind of sometimes goofier kills that Michael would do. But at the end of the day, we see what a brutal, silent killing machine he is. And I think if you're gonna reintroduce the character and set him up for what's to come, I think it's a great way to do it.
It's good. It's definitely a good intro scene. It's like, I don't know, you sit down in the theaters to see the new Halloween movie, you want to see Michael Myers takes the people out. The movie opens with it. Can't go wrong. Creative kills. I mean, you kind of nailed everything his opening does well. I do like it's not quite the self-contained opening that like Urban Legend was, but I do like almost a little short story feel to an opening of a slasher movie. Like you're introduced to a few characters, you know we're going to die, they get killed, boom, Halloween H20 20 years later. Damn, I said the title again. Here's where the movie actually starts. So I like that feel that it has. And we're kind of, it's not a long movie. We've talked a lot about what happens on the campus. This is the opening. The only other scene I would want to shout out is, you mentioned he drives the car off after that kill, and he's making his way to California because he knows where Laurie is now. And there's the scene that I think builds some really good tension where you see this mother and daughter, like a young girl, stop at a highway rest stop with a restroom on the side of the road. And they try to walk into the women's restroom, but Michael's barricaded himself in there apparently for some reason because you see his car out front. And so they go to the men's restroom to use it. They're in the stall, and then the door closes that they had propped open. So, Michael's in there, and the tension is that, we know he needs a new vehicle. It's kind of what's happening here. Is he going to kill the mom? Is this kid going to be scarred? I personally wasn't thinking he would kill the kid because, A, Michael doesn't do that, and B, movies rarely go there. But I am fearing for that mom, what the outcome is going to be. Ultimately, he just snatches her purse. Then, as we see later, all he wanted was the keys out of it. All the contents of the purse and the purse itself are strewn across the ground, leading to the car. But the tension is the mom and daughter are in separate stalls. She sees that it's Michael through the crack of the door. She's not screaming, doesn't want to draw attention, doesn't want him bashing into any of the stalls. And then when her daughter starts screaming, she fears the worst, rushes over, and her daughter was just screaming because of the spiders, which fair.
Horrifying. Yeah, I was gonna say
Very-
terrifying.
Yeah, totally. I get it. But I like that. My note actually says, I love when Michael leaves kids alone. It's this weird, they've done it a few times. There's this one of my, arguably the best scene, best shot of Halloween 2018 is this tracking shot where you follow Michael through these houses on a killing spree. And there's one part where there's a baby crying in the crib and he just walks by it. Like, it makes it a point to be like, he's not interested in that. Something like, I don't even know what it says about the character, but it says something about the character that I just like I don't think he feels bad for the kids. Does he let them go because they're innocent? Like, I don't think he cares for, like, I don't think it's empathy. Like, I don't know what it is that makes him leave kids alone, but I'm glad he does. And I think it makes the character interesting. This is a good example of that. So
I always like when they add ripples like that. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah. Well, the fact that the scene builds so much tension and never has a kill, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a group of Flash villains called the Rogues, and they're interesting because all they really want to do is rob banks and fight the Flash. They don't really have any desires beyond that, but they have a code amongst themselves, and that code is they don't kill anybody. Like they're like, yeah, we rob banks, yeah, we heist things, yeah, we steal stuff, and yeah, we fight the Flash, but if we kill people, it makes us something else, and we're not that. That's not what we do. And I always like when they add things like that because I think it makes the characters much more interesting because it's easy to just kill people, which Michael does in this. That's actually what's interesting to me is like, it feels like this scene in the intro to me almost feel at odds with each other because it feels like two different people's approaches to the situation. Whereas with the bathroom scene, and maybe it's because in the bathroom scene there was a kid present, and so Michael changes his approach and does it differently. But there is this thread throughout portions of this movie. Basically, once he starts going to California, which, why couldn't you show me Michael buying some Slim Jims at a gas station? Like, that would have been fun. Guys like, why are you wearing the mask? And Michael just pays in silence and leaves.
Halloween, Michael Myers road trip.
Michael Myers' Excellent Adventure. It's right there, guys. Gets to California, forgets why he went there in the first place, and the whole movie is him trying to remember why. And then he finally does remember and is like, oh, now I have to go kill some people.
It's just him like sitting on a beach with like a tropical shirt on, just enjoying it. He goes, oh yeah, Lori. Like,
oh yeah,
gets
Lori.
Up and like,
Jesus. Guys, that would have been real embarrassing if I forgot that, guys. But yeah, from like the moment
I was
he gets
looking
the car,
for Laurie Strode, but I found something else.
I found myself. Oh man.
Did we just write the best Halloween movie?
We may have, Chris. We might have. But I do like that role because once he gets the car and starts going to California, Laurie is the focus. It's tough because there's parts of the movie where it feels like his focus is very much on Laurie and he's not interested in killing anybody else. But then you have scenes like the intro scene where he kills all those people, even though it really doesn't have to. I guess I get why he kills Marion Chambers because Marion Chambers is going to know who she's going to be able to contact Laurie, and she also knows what it means. She knows this was Michael, whereas the kids don't know. They have no idea. I guess he needed the kid's car. That's really it. But he was able to steal the woman's car without killing him, so I don't really know what the deal was. But and then on his way to the school and even getting into the school, he purposely isn't. Like, he could have killed the security guard right at the gate there, and he doesn't do it.
Right.
And I guess part of that maybe is he's trying to keep a low profile. I don't know. Maybe these are all calculated kills. He's distracting things so that nobody notices, trying to give himself time. I don't know. But I do like that ripple that they have that Michael will sometimes make the calculated move versus just killing everybody. And, like, that bathroom scene is interesting because it would have been, like, it's not like anybody's going to catch him. It's not like anybody's going to, like, know that Michael was there and did this. It's a random gas station. But the presence of the kid might be a factor there. And I do really like that scene in Halloween 18 too. And maybe, like you said, is it empathy? Michael remembered what he went through as a kid. I don't know. Even Michael Myers knows kids have it rough, and the last thing they need to do is be killed. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but I do like it a lot, and that bathroom scene is really good. It's probably, and I don't mean this backhandedly, it's probably one of the most tense scenes in the film.
What the question is, like, what is the line? Like, when are you old enough to be killed by Michael Myers? Like, is it literally 13? Like, oh, you're a teenager. You're old enough to get into trouble, so you're old enough to get this knife.
But so, it's just occurred to me, Chris, there's a bathroom scene in Halloween 18, too.
There is.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
where
very
he gets
similar.
his jumpsuit, right?
He steals the mask, like, he steals the jumpsuit from the mechanic and then gets the mask out of their car. But, like, there's a whole scene where they're, like, in the stalls and he's, like, taunting them from the outside and ends up killing them. And, yeah.
Michael Myers in bathrooms.
Did David Gordon Green just remake Halloween H20?
Look, I think we've covered the highlights of this movie, the positives. We both enjoy it for what it is. We can't get out of here without mentioning that. And there's a scene in this movie where the kids have some music on, and very briefly, you get a few seconds of "What's This Life For" by Creed. And I did the Leo Point thing. And of course, in credits, we get the Halloween theme. What plays after that? Creed. What's This Life For? It's on. I don't know. I didn't even look up if a soundtrack was released for this, but that song will certainly be on it because it's featured somewhat heavily in the movie. Creed, all over these late 90s slashers.
Hey, you need songs for your soundtrack. Boom. There you go. Creed.
And with that, Andrew, Scream month comes to a close. But it was a good time. I always love a good spooky month. This season has been great. It was great to dive into this very specific, not just genre, but era of a genre of film for this month specifically. And there was probably still some titles that would fit here, but I think we tried to choose the ones that were maybe the most high profile. But it was certainly a time, a good 5, 6, 7 years in the wake of Scream, where its influences were heavily felt across cinema.
Absolutely. I mean, all these movies have sequels, Chris. We could come right back to this next year.
They truly you're right, all of them have sequels. Final Destination, I mean, we talked about it in that episode, but I really wanted to do a deep dive into that franchise and kind of to see where that went. This weird slasher that's not a slasher thing. So maybe on a future episode, I'll be able to give an update on my progress there. But
I'm just saying there's 4 more of those. And I don't know if you know this, but most months have 4 weeks. So we'll see, folks.
We will see. Final Destination month. Who knows? Maybe in the future. But not next month, November, because November on Best of the Rest is Disney month. That's right. Disney. Arguably the studio with the best record for quality. I mean, every studio is going to have its bombs and its stinkers, but I mean, Disney has got to be one of the more consistent ones out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of their thing.
So we're going to be diving into Disney every week in November, specifically a different sort of arm of Disney. I mean, you kind of divide them out into different categories. So in November, we're going to be talking about 4 movies that were released by Disney that were poorly received at the time in one way or another, and all coming from different sections of Disney. So we're going to cover Pixar. We're going to talk about an animated film. We're going to talk about Disney Star Wars and a live action that is, you could say, in the remake of an animated classic genre as well. So I think we're kind of covering the gamut there. I know MCU is under the Disney umbrella as well, but we've covered a few MCU movies on this podcast already. Inevitably, we'll do it again. We've kind of touched on that area already. So we'll be looking at the rest of Disney for some of their more poorly received, diving in, finding all the positives. Andrew, are you ready to talk about some family-friendly affair?
Absolutely. And we'll only say nice things because I'm pretty sure if we don't, Disney comes after.
The mouse will get us. Hopefully we're still around in December to end this year, and we don't get pulled from all podcasting. But no, we're talking positives. Hashtag positivity podcast. That's what we do. We're talking about the best parts of this movie. November, first week, is going to be Pixar. The film we're talking about is Cars. Disney and Pixar's Cars. Many would say maybe this isn't the quote-unquote worst Pixar film, but it kind of ended a streak that Pixar had going for them. You look at those movies as they released. Cars is seen by many as a dip. We'll be getting into it next week on this podcast. And until then, just remember, maybe not every movie is great,
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony, and thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow, and follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.